much for joining us. So as we said before, if you haven't registered on the platform, please do so. Then we'll be able to give you access in the next 24 hours to the course. So today we're going to tell you all about software composition analysis, because this is the main theme that our course, a policy-centric view of open source security threats, is about. But you'll find out more about this as we go along. And we will have lots of time for questions. So please do, while you are listening to the talk today, please, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box, or you can ask to be able to speak and we'll unmute you, and then you can ask your questions, because we have we have a fellow of ours that is joining us today. So that is an expert on software composition analysis. But we will introduce you to him in a moment. First off, as you know, we are the DevSecOps Academy. So what we try to do through our courses and through the course that you're going to gain access today is try to make you as hands-on in secure DevOps as soon as possible. So what this means is that we try to give you short, concise courses to fit your busy agenda, because not all of us have time for a 10-hour Udemy course. Sometimes you just need to know how to implement a certain tool, or how to understand a certain concept and apply it. And that's what we try to do, is create hands-on labs where you learn how to implement tools based around a certain security category, but also how to learn the concepts that they are based on. And that brings us to our fellow program. So our courses are made by fellows from all around the world that are security experts, or they are companies that try to solve a certain problem in DevSecOps. And today we are joined by David Doughty, who is from Sonatype, but I will let him introduce himself. So thanks so much for joining us, David.
Thanks, Inge. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Yeah, so obviously my name's Dave Doughty. I presently work as a solutions architect at Sonatype. I have been in IT for some time, so I've got a lot of history in development tools, managing infrastructure, and the like. So as presently, I work with DevSecOps Academy to build out some of the courses related to Sonatype's platform.
Great, thanks so much, David, and thanks for joining us. And my name's Inge. I'm a DevSecOps advocate here at the DevSecOps Academy, and I also help to create courses and work with our fellows on creating their courses. So the structure of our events is as follows. You will get 2 weeks to complete the course. So today, as you know, is the kickoff. And in the next 24 hours, you will be given access to the course. So don't worry if you find that you can't access the course immediately. We will send you an email that says you now have access, and then you'll be able to go onto the platform and start the course. So you have 2 weeks to finish the course, and then the 28th of September, it will be the end of the course access. But that should be plenty of time, because as we said, we try to make them short courses, but in this course, we do have 2 hands-on labs, so it is a bumper course. It will teach you a lot about software composition analysis, as you will discover. So if you manage to finish these hands-on labs, you of course will get a practitioner's certificate, and you'll get a practitioner's certificate for each lab that you do complete. And of course, we do want you to get the certification. So we will be providing live support from 9 to 5 Central European time. So you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, there is this little icon that looks like a little paper plane. So if you select it when you're doing the hands-on course, or if you're just on the platform itself, then you'll be presented with a list of frequently asked questions. But if you have an issue that does not fall within these frequently asked questions, then you will be connected to our live support team. So please feel free to reach out and ask your questions if you have technical issues, or if you would just like to extend your time, like 3 hours that you'll be getting for each hands-on lab is not enough. We're more than happy during the event to give you this extra time or give you another go at the lab, because we really want to give you enough support so that you are able to finish the labs and have a good experience as well. Because the most important is to enjoy the learning experience, of course. And then you'll also see in the hands-on lab, you'll get the opportunity to fill in a survey. So it's a very short survey. We've revamped it and only has 10 questions. So we would be really happy to get your feedback on the course. What do you think would improve your learning experience? So please do fill that in. We would appreciate that. Yes. So here you can see the relevant security categories that we do focus on for the DevOps lifestyle. So today we are focusing on our security category, which is software composition analysis, as we've said before. And David, who I'll give the floor to now, will tell us a bit more about software composition analysis and how it fits into the wider world today. So I'll hand this over to you now, David.
Okay, so hello again. So you should all be able to see my screen. Good, I can see Inge nodding, which would seem to be a good thing. So
your screen.
Awesome. So what is software composition analysis? I'm going to spend a little time talking about it, how it applies, and then I'll talk a little bit about why it's how we view it at Sonatype and what value we can bring to you as developers. Okay, so figure out how to use PowerPoint. Press the right button, which doesn't seem to want to work. That's better. Okay, so forgive some of the marketing kind of slides, but it helps to set the context of what we're going to be talking about. So I guess we've certainly seen over the last 12 months that everybody's had to struggle to continue their business practices as usual. So what we have actually witnessed over the last several years is that many organizations, if not every organization, is going through some kind of digital transformation that helps them remain competitive, allows them to increase their revenue, create new markets. Unfortunately, the pandemic we've suffered and continue to suffer has only kind of increased the focus on this, and organizations really need to digitally transform without having that direct market. We've all had to kind of adopt to a new way of living, working, buying, selling, however you view it. So it's really accelerated that digital transformation needs for a lot of businesses that, to be honest, they weren't really expecting. And what we see from that is pretty much everybody is now either a software company or a tech company. It doesn't matter whether you do banks, you build tractors, or you sell clothes. You are a software company. You have to have some kind of tech that enables your business model to work. So, struggle with slide transitions. Okay, so given that in a lot of cases technology is not necessarily somebody's key or core discipline, these companies quickly come to realize that the way that we build, package, and run software has actually changed forever. So when I was actually working for a living and developing code. It predated the internet, so a lot of the facilities that you have, we relied on books and purchasing things and getting them delivered via mail on either a floppy drive or latterly on CDs, and then having access to shared libraries and the like that way. Now we can just download things directly from the internet via Google or whatever, and move forward much more quickly. So we already know that applications are really no longer created from scratch. You don't have to write everything. They're assembled from multiple parts or components. They're wrapped in business logic and bespoke code that is written in-house, and still, obviously, you still have to write your own code to develop your own business value. They're then packaged into containers in many cases, and that allows them to then be run on any platform with relatively minimal installation or fuss from that side of things. So therefore, the kind of modern application development practices can be thought of as a software supply chain. And that can then therefore be managed in a very similar fashion to the physical supply chains that we see in other manufacturing industries. And that's really why we have this slide reference. So as such, the software supply chains really need to follow some of the same quality principles that were defined by this guy, William Edwards Deming, in the late 40s and 50s, that ensure that we can embed quality into every step of the manufacturing industry, every manufacturing process, sorry. So things like only using the highest quality parts, sourcing parts from fewer suppliers, building quality in from the start and never passing defects downstream, and being able to create a bill of materials to continuously track the location of every part. Some of these principles have been implemented by automotive manufacturers for many years and enable them to manage their supply chain. And all we're doing is really starting to apply these principles into the software development practices as well. So why is it such a problem? So we do see that the demand for open source components is continuing to grow at a really exceptional exponential pace, as businesses seek to increase their innovation and time to market. So from the statistics that we see at Sonatype, upwards of 90% of an application is actually made up of open source components. And with the suppliers or the project maintainers of these open source releases creating in excess of 21,000 new versions of existing and new components on a daily basis, it gives us a huge logistical challenge for application development teams to be able to manage these components, understand what risk they have associated with them and the like. So software composition analysis really has evolved to allow us to address the challenges associated with this growth in open source consumption and the risk or potential risk that's associated with it. So if we look at this from a traditional bill of materials view, got a couple of pictures of cars on the slide. Other than the fact that they both have 4 wheels, 5 wheels if you include the steering wheel, doors and bodywork and things, the generic things you expect from a car. You appreciate that the one on the left, a small Hyundai, is a relatively modest small family car, but a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow is a not so modest automotive legend in a lot of cases. So what do they have in common? What do they have in common? Well, very simply, they both have a bill of materials. Both manufacturers use a bill of materials to identify which parts are being used in which model and where those parts came from. Very simply, so that they understand if there's a problem with a manufacturer, the part has a fault, that they can actually identify exactly where that part went and which cars which have subsequently been shipped to customers and users, so they can basically track them down and be able to remediate that problem as quickly as possible with as minimal fuss, without having to recall every single car that they've ever produced. So bill of materials is a really valuable commodity to help businesses identify fault and to track down where that fault has been shipped in terms of the finished product. So a couple of kind of examples here. So why do we really need to bother? So this has got some real world examples related back to the automotive industry. So General Motors had to recall almost 3 million vehicles over a faulty ignition switch. So ignition switches, for those who may or may not know, they generally retail around 60 to 100 euros. So a relatively modest cost when you're paying 14, 15, 20, 30,000 euros for a car. So if they had to go and replace all of the ignition switches across this 3 million vehicles, that would be a 300 million cost. That's not insignificant, but that's what if they had to recall every possible vehicle that may have had an ignition switch ever made. So that 300 million could pale into insignificance. Tens of millions of vehicles, not only the initial cost of the parts, so the cost to recall it, the cost to fit them, the backlog that it would create in garages to actually change the part over, which does take time. It becomes very difficult. On top of this, General Motors were severely punished for not responding to the problem soon enough. And if the problem had been identified and resolved sooner, not only would people not have lost their lives, the fiscal cost would have been a fraction of the figures that we see here. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they had to settle with a $2.5 billion lawsuit to resolve this. So, what, if anything, has this to do with software? So this is a mechanical fault. It's a bit of plastic, a few bits of wires, and an ignition switch in a car. It's got no software associated with it all. Well, as we know, everybody's moving to a software driven landscape. Your cars are becoming much more reliant on software systems to manage the engine, to manage the entertainment systems, to manage even the driving experience itself. So, well, I already kind of described that all organizations are becoming technical companies. They rely on software for their retention, new business, and increasingly on that to remain competitive. So if anybody remembers watching Fast and Furious, if you haven't, you probably should take a look at some of the trailers on YouTube, although I guess other streaming services are available. You'll remember that there was an epic scene of chaos caused by hackers which accessed the self-drive capabilities of hundreds of cars in New York City. Now, can you imagine what would have happened if that was a reality? Now, obviously, that's somewhat of a flight of fantasy, but it clearly illustrates that we don't just have to worry about the mechanics of our vehicles. We do have to consider the problems that comes with our software. Or we could find ourselves exiting directly from the top floor of a parking garage, several floors to rest several floors below us. And it's not just the automotive industry. So I don't have any slides, but the Boeing 737 MAX, it was taken out of service for several years because of a software problem introduced to get over some redesign based on adding larger engines, being able to take a flight much further, carry more people. But a simple software fault caused several air traffic incidents that effectively pulled the aircraft from service for several years, costing Boeing not an insignificant sum of money. So software does have to deal with this kind of quality issue. And software composition analysis is one of the things that we use to identify the open source that we are using within an application. It creates a software bill of materials, a parts list of those components that go to make up your applications. So this includes not just the open source dependencies that your bringing in that you know about, but everything that gets included when you run the application. So direct dependencies, transitive dependencies that come in with dependencies of dependencies of dependencies inside your application, things that you maybe don't even realize that you're using. So given that open source projects use other open source projects, and obviously you get the thread from that, you can end up with a long train of components which you may or may not appreciate that you're actually using. And while you may understand the components that you define, you maybe don't understand the full provenance of the components that are being brought in by those third parties. So in addition to the open source, there's components that come from third parties, systems integrators, or closed source, so things that maybe organizations sell in terms of functionality. There's also components that we create internally that we share between applications within our business, things that we term as inner source that we share. But we need to track all of these things. We need to document them, verify the provenance, and identify any risk associated with these components. And the risk that we really look at typically is categorized generally in two ways. There's legal risk, so slightly more subtle threats to our business in certain ways. If we fail to adhere to obligations that are set out by the license for the components that we use, then we can be held to account. Again, it can result in financial penalties, reputational damage, or if we breach certain restrictive licenses, we may have to open source our entire application. And if you think it's not real, then reality is somewhat different. BMW, so you may have heard of them. They're a relatively small German automotive manufacturer. So they had to hand over the source code for the i3. It's their small electric car in Europe. I guess it may have a different designation depending where you are. So just because they actually included a restrictive library in their application, they then had to share their entire source code to the world. Not exactly great. But typically the most common reason for looking at your open source is security risk. And the software bill of materials allows you to clearly highlight any flaws that a third party could exploit for their or others' gain. And that's something that we're going to explore in a little more detail over the next 10-15 minutes. Okay, so in the beginning, so the way that third-party actors have traditionally attacked our applications has been through an easy-to-find backdoor. So open source projects in the main have a very well-defined and very good process for managing issues and security flaws. They do their due diligence. Somebody will identify a flaw, they'll fix it, they'll release a patch or a new version, and then they create a notification which informs everyone that the flaw exists and that you should upgrade to the fixed version. Eminently sensible. Why would you not upgrade to a version that hasn't got a flaw in it? Well, unfortunately, we know from the evidence, and I've got two notable examples on the slide, that organizations are failing to protect both themselves and our customers, allowing third parties to look for targets across the internet that are running unpatched applications on exposed systems. So Equifax is obviously the kind of I guess the most well-known breach. It resulted in very significant fiscal and reputational damage to their business, but not only for the business, also for the individuals that were closely associated with their failure to patch their application in good time, and then to effectively cover up the fact that they had lost several millions of user data over a 6-month period. So these things are happening right now. And what Sonatype have seen from our data analysis is that there are now 3 points of attack that third parties are taking in order to gain access to our data, our customers' data, but also to our systems, because there are obviously other ways of utilizing a backdoor into your compute. Bitcoin mining is a very popular monetization of hacking. So how do they do what they're going to do? Well, much like our development processes, which are shifting left, so we're starting to focus much more on our developers to not only deliver business value, but to fix everything, build in quality, etc. But our attackers are also moving left. They're moving from downstream attacks to pollute the supply chain much earlier. And we see this in the shape of upstream attacks. These are typically characterized by manufactured industries, issues in components that have got wide adoption, either directly, perhaps as a trusted contributor, or by exploiting exposed credentials, and you'd be surprised at how often that does happen, or indirectly by using something like typo squatting or brand jacking, and I'll talk about a couple of different types of attack that have occurred in that way. There's also midstream attacks that inject malicious code via trusted third parties. These directly affect the tools that we're using as developers, and also undermining the trust in the supply chain that really is the lifeblood of our development capacity. So you have to trust the tools that you're using, that they're not going to inject malware. If that trust goes, then it starts to create quality issues. You start to have to focus more on testing. You have to validate everything you use, and it becomes a much more onerous process to release change. And then at the end, we still have the continuing exploiting of downstream attacks. These attacks aimed at the publicly declared vulnerabilities that some of us still fail to close. They're still there. People are still using vulnerable versions of structs. People are still using vulnerable versions of Jackson data bind, etc. So it really is incumbent on us to fix these things as we build our applications. And sometimes it's a very simple move from version A to version B, and that's it. It doesn't even affect the functionality. We just have to understand what the risk is. So, and from the evidence that Sonatype is seeing, the volume and number of supply chain attacks is accelerating. So from 2012 to 2021 is a very simple timeline that obviously doesn't include everything, but if we look at recent history and some examples of attacks that we've seen across these different vectors, you'll start to understand the threats that all of this has to us and to our businesses. So, looking at a couple of examples of upstream attacks, these were recently manufactured against users of Twilio and Discord developers. They were designed to infiltrate via the developer desktop. So for those who don't know, Twilio is a leading cloud communications platform as a service. It enables developers to build voice over IP based applications. So programmatically place, receive telephone calls and text messages and the like. So the official Twilio NPM package gets downloaded close to 500,000 times a day. That's a lot of people consuming that package. The counterfeit package as a single file piece of malware really relies on the unwary picking the wrong package name and injecting it into their supply chain. Simple kind of typo, you just mistype the name and you download the wrong file. NPM doesn't validate it. It just says, yeah, that package exists. There you go. And what you ended up deploying was a piece of code which utilized a reverse shell on your desktop that allows a remote code execution attack. Well, that also allows, potentially allows the attackers to widen that attack across the entire business further downstream. Whatever you've got access to as a developer, they get access to. So that's that. And developers have generally have elevated privileges, so you can actually go ahead and take quite a lot of systems under your control, access to databases, potentially access to customer data and the like. So ultimately, if you included a node package in your development project, which has got an infected package as a dependency, you're also infected. So anybody is, so it's like a virus, much like the recent pandemic, the COVID. It's very easy to transmit. In theory, it can cycle and can continue to cascade across many levels if that component remains undetected. And that's one of the things that Sonatype are doing, is to be able to identify these malicious packages. In the case of Discord, it uses the legitimate Discord package. So you download you mistype the name, you get the typo squatting package with the malware injected. It also gives you the real package. So ultimately, you get this functionality you're expecting, but you also get some things that you didn't expect. But it also acts as a mask that can distract both you as a developer, because yeah, it does what it says it's supposed to do, but also anybody trying to research the vulnerability. They can hide and mask that malicious intent, and by ensuring you got this the functionality that you desire, even if you've accidentally installed the wrong component. So that's just a couple of examples. There are lots. If you take a look at the Sonatype blog, then you can see a lot of details about varying package attacks that have occurred. Something that kind of was highlighted at the beginning of this year was the dependency confusion type attack. So this is a sophisticated form of brandjacking. Sonatype actually identified and monitored the publishing of research packages by Alex Burson, and that started in July 2020 and only ended in February 2021 when he published his research. So in simple terms, dependency confusion attacks rely on third-party public repositories, allowing anybody to publish packages or components to coordinates which actively represent actual business application packages. So it allows them to take advantage of build pipelines being misconfigured, that to download malicious code ahead of the trusted internal sources. So for those who are not aware, Sonatype manage for the community the Maven Central repository. We've got quite a lot of controls around the management of publishing code to ensure that only authorized publishers can deploy packages to protected coordinates. So if I logged in as Dave Doughty, I would not be able to publish com.microsoft. I couldn't publish a package to Microsoft unless I was a Microsoft employee, and a trusted Microsoft employee at that. Many public repositories just give free access to publish any package to any coordinate with little or no control over the namespace ownership, which allows these brandjacking attacks to occur. So you can publish JavaScript packages, Python packages to coordinates which represent organizations like Microsoft, Apple, etc. And Alex Burson's research, which published, basically highlighted the companies that he was able to inject malicious, or actually white hat testing code into the supply chain. If that had been somebody who was trying to do it maliciously, you can only imagine the amount of problems that would have caused globally. However, once he published his research, it resulted in a massive kind of copycat package publishing exercise. So by the end of March this year, there were in excess of 10,000 copycat attacks on using the same kind of mechanism. And again, this is something that we have to kind of address to manage our software supply chain. Recent midstream attacks. So these things were very well published globally in many global news outlets. SolarWinds and CodeCov, in the shape of in the CodeCov attack, they effectively breached the CodeCov software auditing tool using credentials that were exposed from a flawed Docker image. So from that, they were able to modify the bash overloader script, which was used by thousands of projects, that then resulted in hundreds of networks being breached. So again, a third party that you trust to use their system to identify problems with your software are all of a sudden being used to inject malicious code into your environment. So what software compositional analysis challenges do we face? So open source challenges, as we've just discussed, there's an ever increasing reliance on open source that's used to construct our business applications. And we've looked at some of the mechanisms that adversaries have used and continue to use in order to exploit our systems, to gain access to our data and to our customer data. And yet we continue in many cases to continue to use open source components with known vulnerabilities. And many organizations either not aware or refuse to accept that there's a problem. And in the main, some, if not all of the problems that I've talked about could and should have been identified and stopped before they were ever a reality. I'm not going to talk through the slide statistics. I think you get the hint now. So all of the different parts that make up an application are more important than ever to manage across your entire supply chain. However, we know that manual governance processes don't scale. So while it may be fine for a small shop, when you start to scale to tens, hundreds, thousands of developers, then it becomes ever much harder to implement controls and to identify your open source risk. With manual controls, developers can either ignore the review process or leaving your organization at risk, or it takes them too long to innovate and deliver new business functionality to the market, again, putting your business at risk from a reduction in revenue, reduction in market share, and the like. Our security teams are spending too much time researching vulnerabilities and less time enforcing policies, which increases the likelihood of a breach. So if you're just trying to find out what vulnerabilities exist, you're not actually checking your code to see if they actually exist in your systems. And operations teams, they just lack the visibility of the risk as applications are being developed, and then when they're being deployed into production. And there's no way to deliver a software bill of materials to other customers. So you don't have a record of what you used, what was created in a particular application. And at the end of the kind of thread, there's the legal teams. They spend too much time reviewing licenses, copyright rules, which can slow down development. So yeah, you can't go to release because we haven't checked that this license is adhered to. Well, you never know, it might. And they go to they go and have a little huddle, and they come back and 3 weeks later and say you can use it or you can't use it. Again, increasing the likelihood that the business could be sued, or you could lose your intellectual property if you release something which has got a restrictive obligations in it. So what we really need to do is to automate the process. We need to automate the consumption of our open source components and be able to automate the identification of any risk at any time throughout the software development lifecycle. So we need a a solution that really aligns application development, application security, operations and cloud infrastructure, as well as the legal and the compliance teams. Something that includes a complete platform across the entire software development lifecycle and integrates into our DevOps tooling. So it surfaces issues where we use it. We don't have to go log into some other portal to be able to look at things. We can just get it as we're building our software. And something that really provides expert remediation guidance and automated dependency management to create that bill of materials to identify what components we're using and potentially what risk exists in those components. So in order to automate our response to open source threat, we need to have precise identification. We need to be able to accurately identify the component and version that we're using. In a lot of cases, tools that we see in the market use the file names and to be able to reference what they are, and then to be able to relate any known risk with them. But how do you know if it says what it says it is? I can rename a file in a matter of a few keystrokes. If we were looking at a criminal investigation, how do you accurately identify the person responsible for a crime? Now, if we're obviously we have DNA testing these days, but historically we've relied heavily on fingerprints. So if somebody leaves a fingerprint, a thumbprint, as they're kind of going away and doing whatever they're not supposed to be, we can use that to really accurately identify which individual is responsible for a burglary, a car theft, and so forth. But if we take the fingerprint analogy further, if we want to accurately identify, sorry, I lost my thread of thought now. So if we look at the slide and we take if we take the file name, or we have an individual that we want to identify, then if we take their surname, so for those who are not familiar, this is a snap of a telephone directory. So back before Google, we used to have to be able to find telephone numbers for individuals based on a name in a book, and obviously that's quite a manual lookup. So the analogy is, if we only take the surname and look at it in a phone book, you get a long list of, in this case, Smiths or Joneses or whatever happens to be your a common name in your so then you have to figure out, well, how do I know which Smith I want? So I have to know some other attributes associated with it. So I have to know their first name. I have to know potentially their address, and that then gives me the phone number, so I ensure I'm contacting the right person. So too many vendors rely on taking the name and then relating that back to what's known as the common vulnerability, the CVE, the problem issue information. So that gives us a problem, because if we look at an example, so if we take Spring Framework, it has about 40 files or so within it. Now, if you're not using something from, if you're only using one file from the Spring Framework, that may or may not have the vulnerability that has been highlighted. If you're just saying Spring Framework has 50 vulnerabilities, any of those files may be vulnerable, or none of them may be vulnerable, or one of them may be vulnerable. So you have an issue of, well, if you're saying there's 40 files which are potentially vulnerable, which one is really vulnerable? How much time do I have to spend identifying and manually tracking that exactly the one or possibly two that have a specific vulnerability? There's a lot of manual effort required. It's not particularly agile, and it's a lot of noise that detracts you from actually writing your business code. So what you really have to do is to narrow down the issue to a specific component and a specific version of a component. So Spring MVC 3.2.17 as an example. Now you've got you've got the exact version with the exact vulnerability. You can forget about the other 39 files. So average industry stats for reviewing vulnerabilities, it takes somewhere between 4 and 8 hours. So there's a lot of time and effort that you're saving, reducing the noise by identifying which CVE is associated with which file. Less noise, less manual work, more time to do much more interesting coding, which is why we're here as developers. So that gives us a reason as to what we want to get out of software composition analysis, what we want to be able to do to automate the process. But even with precise identification, you're still left with just a list of things. It might be a very accurate list. However, you don't know which risks that you have are important. You just have a very long list. Depending on how big the application is, it could be tens to hundreds. So you then have to decide which one of these risks do I want to deal with first. Do I deal with my security risks? Do I deal with my licensing risks? Whatever's appropriate for you. So what's important? How do I automate the remediation? Which bit is first? Well, the way that we do it is by implementing policy-driven software compositional analysis. So we, in Sonatype, the Sonatype Nexus lifecycle, we implement a policy engine that allows us to very simply prioritize the list of issues in our application, highlighting the things that are most important, most critical, most high, medium, and low. Whether it's a security or a legal risk, you can determine which is worst by saying, is it a threat 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, etc. And we can actually extend that into the tools that we're using as a developer. So the IDEs, so Eclipse, IntelliJ, Visual Studio Code, we can inject it into our browsing. So if we were looking for a component to include in a new development, we can, and we're looking through, say, Maven Central in this case, or NPM, or PyPy, or whoever, then we can actually get some feedback directly when we're searching to say, is this good, bad, or indifferent? What are the license obligations? Before we actually start using it as well. So before you even get to download it into your environment. And policies also have a bunch of other advantages that you'll discover when you do the hands-on labs. We can actually build in actions and notifications. So we can actually force the feedback to provide much more visibility into the threats, depending on where you are in your software development lifecycle. And ultimately, if you fail to address the problem, if there's a significant issue, then you can stop the code from being released. We can automatically upgrade. We can automatically inject feedback into your SCM environment, generate notifications into Jira, create tickets in that way. So it becomes embedded within your daily practices as a developer. So it makes sense to use policy to be able to highlight the risk, to make it much easier to determine which risk we need to address first. Okay, so I kind of talked for quite a long time there. So if there is any questions, I'm quite happy to take them now. If not, I shall hand back to Inge to close the show.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, David. Just take a look in the chat to see if anyone has asked any questions. Please, if you think of one later on, we can also keep it for the end of the session. I might have a small question because I was a bit curious myself. So you said, David, that the malicious Discord package on NPM was discovered by Sonatype, if I understood that right. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I saw on the slide. So the Discord package was discovered by Sonatype.
Yes.
Since the Maven repo is managed by Sonatype, you have a lot more control over it, but what is your process for detecting and reporting packages on other registries like npm?
Okay, so nobody's listening, but it's magic.
Oh, that's my.
Unfortunately, so we have some proprietary analysis that we do of public repositories. So we monitor new package versions, new packages that are published, and then we process that information to really compare it to historical attack information. So I think typo squatting is very easy to spot. It's a name that looks very similar to another name. It's just then a question of managing, of actually then doing a deep dive to understand if it does actually inject any malware into the supply chain, or if it's a legitimate package. So it's a bit. So there is a bit of magic in terms of the AI machine learning that automatically monitors npm presently and PyPy very shortly. But then it relies on our actual physical data analysts to make sure that actually it is a threat and not a legitimate piece of code.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thanks for that. I do see that we have a question, 2 questions from our audience members. So Shane has asked, but perhaps I will address it when we're looking at the course, but what knowledge level, or maybe David, you can say, what knowledge level do you need to complete this course? Could you do it without hints or without taking a lot of hints?
Yeah, I hope, well, the whole purpose of the way we wrote the course was really to try and educate as you go along. It's not designed to trip people up. It's hopefully the material is sufficient that it actually gives you a background as to what we're doing as we go through. So yeah, you shouldn't need a lot of hints, I don't think.
Yeah, we try to give you a lot of pushes to go towards the documentation, and we also, I think, explain quite a lot also in the preparation lab about the concepts that you will encounter and the assignments that you need to do in the hands-on lab. So hopefully you don't need too many hints. So I think, Shane, if you follow the instructions, then you should be fine, I think, if you want to try and finish it on the advanced level. I saw we also had a question from Roy. He asked if you are able to explain a bit more about the process to rescan binary libraries periodically to identify newly identified vulnerabilities.
So we normally inject our scanning into the build pipeline, but it can be injected into the IDE. So when you're writing your code, you have your dependencies in your manifest file. When you build it, the IDE will be able to render what components you're using and what threats they have. So you can see it as you're actually writing the code. You can also see it as if you inject in your build pipeline. So in your Jenkins, your Bamboo, your Circle CI, it'll automatically update. If you get to the point where you've resolved all your vulnerabilities, so when you do that, it will automatically highlight new risk. If you've fixed everything, or the majority of everything you're going to fix, and you go to production, and we have something called continuous monitoring, which really, so you have the bill of materials, which when you go live is fixed. So you know what the application is, you know what the components are. So the bill of materials is reevaluated every 24 hours using a continuous monitoring feature that says, if Sonatype identify a new vulnerability, then you will get a notification. You will get an email, or it'll create a JIRA ticket, or it'll inject something into a third-party system. If that answers your question, hopefully.
Great, thanks, David. We also have a question from Vincent, who asks about the ID integration and whether you support pre-commit hooks, preventing the vulnerable package to get into the SCM in the first place.
No, we do not. So as I say, so it depends on your practices. So there's obviously going to be an overgeneralization. So normally when you start, when you turn on software composition analysis, you've already got an application in the main. So normally we're onboarding applications directly from SCM. So we scan the manifest and say, this is what you've written, these are the problems that exist. If you add a new package in, then if that's going through the IDE, then you get feedback about the package that you've added in through the IDE. So again, before you commit, you could get feedback at that point. If you commit with the issue, then it goes into the build pipeline. It would highlight in the build pipeline that this issue exists. If you're using branches in SCM, then it can also provide feedback into your pull request to say, well, we've created a new feature, it's got a problem with this particular library. We can then say, do we allow this pull request to be completed? It's got a CVSS 10, it's got a critical vulnerability. So there are ways we mitigate it, but we don't have pre-commit hooks for SCM at the moment.
Okay, thanks, David. Alexander has a comment or sort of a question. He said that on the last slide you had the Sonatype settings window, and he saw that there were policy settings for different stages. Yes. But he does wonder how it is enforceable for the release stage. Okay, so really, yeah, it really depends on how you build your pipeline. So the stages that we supply in the product are fixed. We have one for develop, we have one for source, which is when we onboard from source control. We have build, we have stage, which is testing. We have release, which is normally when you've done all of the testing, it's been approved, it gets published, ready for deployment. Now, again, I come from a banking background in my most recent history. So you build a new application, new release, it then sits for several days, weeks, while operations decide what time slot or they can actually deploy it into production. So that the release stage in that case would be like a pre-release point. So if it sits there, then you can wait, and then you can deploy it into operations and use operator to continuously monitor. But that's really the release is when you've created something that, yeah, it's fit for purpose. We've fully tested it. It goes into a release state, however you manage it. And everybody, unfortunately, everybody's different. Mm-hmm. But the enforcement is really there to say, if we push it to release, i.e. ready to be distributed, then we want to make sure that there's no threats associated with it. Okay, great. Thanks for that. Irfan also has a question. Other than open source software vulnerabilities, do you detect other kinds of vulnerabilities, like other scanners?
Other kinds of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I maybe perhaps what I'm just inferring from the question, I would guess, and Irfan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is besides open source. So it's actually an open source scanner. So yeah. So yeah. So the short answer is not with the Nexus Lifecycle product, which is the subject of the course. We obviously have other products which do static code analysis. We have products which do infrastructure code and container management, runtime analysis, build analysis to identify issues with containers. So not in the context of what we're discussing at this point. Okay, great. I think that brings us to the end of the questions, and because we are running a little bit over time, I will just quickly do a quick run through of the platform, just to show you how the course looks and to familiarize you a little bit with the platform. If you do have a burning question, you can put it in the chat, and maybe we'll just answer one or two more at the end. All right. So just quickly, but just before we start, so as we said, there are 2 labs with this course. So it is a bit bigger than our normal labs, but for each lab, you'll get 3 hours, and you can do them at separate times. You can always also contact us through the support if you do need more time. So please don't worry about that. So in the first lab, what we're going to be doing is you're first of all going to identify vulnerable dependencies, and you're also going to become familiarized with how to find the vulnerability severities by using a few different tools and also doing it manually, so you can compare how it is to do it automatically versus manually. And then you'll create some automatically enforced policies with rules for when certain risks are detected, and then of course actions that should be taken when these policies are violated. And this is very much to give you a foundation with using the Nexus lifecycle. And then when you do the second lab, it's really more of a deep dive, and you'll learn a bit more about using the Nexus lifecycle. You'll learn more about the policies that you've applied to your application. You'll learn about different kinds of components, like it might not be strictly an open source component, like David mentioned, might be an inner source component. So you'll find out and learn more about that. And then you'll also learn how to categorize your applications according to certain traits and how to apply policies to these categories that you've created. And then you'll also be able to enable notifications to certain stakeholders. So maybe there's developer or product owner when certain policy violations do occur that you would like to notify. So you'll learn how to do that as well. So I'm just going to exit the slideshow, and now we're on the platform. Oops. 1 second. Okay, so I'll just show you, sometimes people do have a bit of difficulties with navigation. So when you go to your courses page, you can just search for the name of the course, and then I'll just take you right there. And as we said, we'll give you access in the next 24 hours. And when you're here, you'll see that there is a preparation lab, but also hands-on lab. And right now I've already created one of the hands-on labs just for the demo, but you can use here, you can, if you select this drop-down menu, then you'll have the option to choose 2 different labs. So once you've done the first lab, just come back here again, and then you can select here the second lab. So as you can see here, we have a number of concepts that we're going to explain in the preparation lab that will prepare you for the hands-on lab, such as David has explained in the beginning in a really nice way about the bill of materials. We explain concepts like this in short, just to prepare you for the hands-on lab. And at the end of the preparation lab, you can choose to, first of all, take a quiz, or you can do the hands-on lab. So the quiz just checks the knowledge that you should have picked up in the preparation lab. And then once you've done the quiz, so I would recommend it, but it's not mandatory. Once you've done it, you can go to the hands-on lab, and then you can spin up your hands-on lab. So here you can see there's a number of resources that you'll get. If it's loading like this, it means it's just creating the resource. And here you can see you have your credentials, so please do log in with your credentials. Don't log in with your own GitLab credentials. If you use GitLab, use the ones we've given you, because this will have your project already in it. So it will have an application, for example. So if we launch it, here you will see, for example, so I've already logged into this GitLab instance. So here you can see we have we have 3 applications, and we have our automated pipeline already. So throughout the course, we will have a certain amount of assignments. So you'll get enough information. If you don't have enough information, you can tell us in the survey and tell us what you would like to see. So as you can see, you have the timer. So if you don't submit the lab before the timer runs out, then your lab will be destroyed and everything you've done so far has been destroyed. So please do submit your lab, just so that you don't have all your work done for nothing. So even if you are still stuck on something and your time's about to run out, rather submit it and we can still give you more time, because then that preserves the lab for manual inspection, or it just will keep it and then we can extend your time. And then here you can also see your level. So some people like to finish their courses on advanced, because it will be, the level will also be on your certificate. And the way you do that is to only use 2 hints. But if as soon as you use more than 2 hints, then your level will drop down to meteor. And speaking of hints, if you see here, when you get an assignment, you'll have the instructions. So we'll give you a bit of background knowledge, and then we'll give you the instructions. And then if you're stuck, you can just say, select this, do you need a hint? And then select show your hints. But and then that should help you if you're really stuck to carry on. And talking about getting stuck, so here on the left, you can see we actually have an automated checker. So this should help you be a good guideline for it to tell you whether you're on the right track or on the wrong track. But of course, like, there are many ways to do things. So sometimes people do things in a very original way that our checker might not know. So if your check is not passing, then, and you're sure that you're doing the right thing and you're getting the same responses, that is, because we all normally in the assignment, we'll say, okay, if you've done this successfully, you should have this response. Then if you're getting that same response, then do continue. It might just be that the checker does not recognize your way of doing it. So then you can just submit your lab at the end here for manual review, and they will manually review it for you. It might take up to 24 hours, a day and a half if it's during the week. And if it's on the weekend, we'll look at it on Monday. Yeah, besides this, as I said, we do have a survey. So if you have any comments, we would love to know your, get your feedback and what we can improve, because we want to improve the learning experience for you. And here, the last thing I will say about this is we do have this really nice red button that says destroy lab. Don't destroy the lab unless maybe you have a technical difficulty and you're advised to destroy the lab and spin it up again, so to create it again, because it is a virtual lab. But then, because once you do press this button, all your work is gone, but there might be a few occasions when you need to do this. All right. So that's all. As we said before, if you haven't registered, then please do, and then we're going to be giving you access in the next 24 hours. Did anybody have any more questions? Because I think otherwise we have run a bit over time. So thanks so much for staying, those who have. Then that's the end of our kickoff today, and you have 2 weeks. We will be sending out the emails once you have access to the course, so just keep an eye out for that. But it should be by tomorrow. Yes. Thanks, Shane, for the tips. He's a very experienced DevSecOps user. All right. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks a lot, David, as well. That was a really interesting presentation. I certainly learned quite a bit.
Oh, thanks, Inge. Thanks everybody for joining us. Sorry, I went on a little longer than was planned.
No,
I talk a lot.
I think it was worth it. You had a really great. I love the cars, the metaphors. All right. Bye, everyone.